All right, so if you're coming from last week's video, this is part 2 of the most traumatic incidents that ever happened in my life that happened weeks apart. And in the last video, I talked about this severe trauma and PTSD I developed from an accident where 14 sheets of plywood fell on my mom and she almost had to have her foot amputated. And then a few weeks after that story, so if you haven't watched that video, please go check it out because this story builds on that. A few weeks after the plywood accident, my mom is recovering and in physical therapy doing all the work, and she's in the bathtub and she gets out of the bath that night. So this is like right before bed. My mom had taken a bath to like unwind. She starts not being able to talk. Her words start slurring and she gets to the point where she physically cannot communicate, and her hands go into claws that she like can't undo, and we don't know what's happening. And I'm 10.5 years old. I'm just a baby. So my dad thankfully was here for this incident. He was not here for the plywood accident, but he was here for this, and he called 911. This one was more scary. The first accident was over a much shorter period of time. It developed, I would say, more lasting trauma long term, but it was over a short period of time. It was probably less than 5 minutes from the time I heard my mom screaming to me coming inside and getting the plywood off of her foot. But this incident was much more traumatic in a lot of ways because there was no closure for it. I thought my mom was dying. So I was absolutely just, in my memory, sobbing. And my dad tasked me with watching for the ambulance because our house is hard to find. And so they originally even went to the wrong house. And so I had to run in and tell my dad to tell the 911 operator that they had gone to the wrong house. Finally, they came, and in therapy, as I was writing about this, I felt guilty because I thought I was hiding when the paramedics came and hiding from the trauma, but actually I think I was just trying to stay out of the way when the paramedics were here. They were in the bathroom and I didn't see any of that. Getting my mom on a stretcher, ready to go, making sure she was stabilized, or trying to stabilize her. I remember being in another room, and I was not raised religious. And I remember being so scared. This is the most visceral part for me of this trauma. I remember being so scared and thinking my mom was gonna die that I knelt down and I started praying, and I said, God, if you're up there, I will believe in you if you save my mom. And whatever is up there, I believe like the universe is up there now, but the universe did save my mom. I remember kneeling there praying. I was just so scared. And then my next memory, and my mom has like no memory of any of this. She thought she had like put her clothes on before the paramedics come, and I was like, no girl, you were in a bathtub. And so when you got out, you were in a towel and they took you away in a towel. My next memory is like standing by the door, watching my mom go out on a stretcher. I don't think that she was able to speak at that point. So I think it was one of the paramedics that looked at me, this absolutely petrified girl sobbing. And one of the paramedics, I think, said, everything's gonna be okay. Your mom is gonna be okay. Which obviously they shouldn't have promised that because they didn't know. They didn't know what was going on. So that was my next memory. And then I remember, you know, we drove to the emergency room behind the ambulance, but like very far behind the ambulance because we had to lock up the house and stuff. And that was scary because we didn't know, was my mom worse? Was she having new symptoms? Like there was so much unknown and so much uncertainty in that time before we got to the emergency room to see how she was doing. And so that was really scary. Then we got to the emergency room, and this was my first experience really in an emergency room. It was incredibly traumatic. I believe that this is where I have reoccurring nightmares of being like in hospital or an emergency room and just trying to like walk and get out of there, and just seeing like horror after horror, like people on stretchers, like burn victims, like just really traumatic stuff. And I think that this is where that comes from. And so like we got in, we saw my mom. She had a room, which was great. Other people didn't, because there was a woman in the hallway right outside my mom's room on a stretcher who was screaming for hours. Like the whole time we were there, she was screaming and in pain. And I don't know what was going on there. I think it was her back. Like she kept screaming about her back. And I don't know if they like were not giving her pain meds or what was going on, but That was incredibly traumatic for me at 10.5 years old. Anyway, we ended up being in a room for hours. My mom could speak by this point, like her speech slowly started to come back. Her hands weren't claws anymore, thank God. But they didn't know what had happened, so they started doing all these tests, right? And at one point they thought they found something on a test, so they said, we need to keep you overnight. My dad and I went home around like maybe 2 a.m. and came back at like maybe 7 a.m. I have no memory of coming back. Both my parents say that my mom got a room in the hospital. She wasn't just in the emergency room, she was admitted to the hospital. And I have no memory of seeing my mom after that. My only memory is my mom really wanting to go home and them not finding anything on any scans or anything, and me being like, no, we can't go home. You need to stay here until they figure out what the heck is going on, because if we go home, this could happen again. This could immediately happen again because we don't know what happened. That was the ongoing trauma, was that they didn't know what happened. They released her and we went home, and we till this day have not figured out what happened that night. Was it a seizure? Was it a stroke? We don't know. I was incredibly just terrified, petrified as a kid that this was going to happen again because we didn't know what had happened. And unfortunately, the two traumas combine in a lot of ways because one, they were so close together. But then my mom loves her baths as a way to unwind before bed. And so in her recovery, she continued to take baths after this incident. This was before cell phones. So if she needed something in the bath with her like totally messed up foot, so she couldn't get out to get herself anything, she would bang on the side of the bath, which you pretty much could hear anywhere in the house. She would bang and then she would call my name. And let me tell you, like when I say that this was like very re-traumatizing for me, we didn't know it at the time. My parents didn't know this. I didn't realize that this was like incredibly re-traumatizing for me, but because of the two traumas together, from the plywood accident, I heard a thud, which was the plywood falling on her, and then I heard her screaming and screaming my name. And then the second incident being in the bathtub, when you put those together, and any time in the future that my mom was in the bathtub pounding, screaming my name, I would feel these feelings of being right back in those emergency situations, and I'd be in the fight or flight. That was hard to have PTSD from both incidents and also be so young that I didn't realize it and I couldn't verbalize it. So I couldn't be like, let's find a different system. It just, this was it. And so for a long time, I would just, I mean, anytime I would hear a thud or I'd hear my mom yell my name or my mom was in the bathtub, that I would be like on high alert, freaking out, triggered. Like it was really scary. And so I think this was my first foray into the medical field, not knowing what the heck they're doing. And there's so many things that they can figure out, but it seems when it comes to my mom and I, we are just medical anomalies and they just cannot figure out what the heck happens with us. And so that was just incredibly scary because I felt like from the first incident, I developed that hypervigilance, hyper-responsibility. From the bathtub incident, I just developed a sense of, oh my God, at any time this could happen to my mom again. And I need to be prepared and I need to be ready for an emergency at any time. These two situations compounded, they were really pivotal in my like childhood for sure. And so it was definitely like a very scary time because I wasn't doing any therapy. I wasn't processing any of this. I was just surviving. I was in survival mode. And so doing therapy now and doing written exposure therapy, as I talked about in the first video, and doing internal family systems therapy with my firefighter little Sierra, I have felt like I've done so much processing and I've done so much integration and I've done so much releasing. I've really been trying to take the burden off of little Sierra. Like she has carried this for so long. She has carried these feelings of hypervigilance and hyper-responsibility and having to be the adult all the time, even when I was 10.5 years old. And so like I have felt so much more at peace. Like just this week is when I finished my written exposure therapy for these two things. And I felt so much more at peace, calmer, less intrusive thoughts. That's something I think I want to talk about in another video, is what has helped my intrusive thoughts so much, because I definitely have intrusive thoughts from both of these accidents. I've been working on my intrusive thoughts and I've been working on all these things through therapy, and I'm getting like all these insights and all these realizations of like where all these maladaptive behaviors came from. These were, like I said, the most pivotal childhood experiences, and I really became a different person after these experiences. And so I think what's really important here is like I now realize how much I needed to process this. For me, it was through talk therapy and this written exposure therapy, and maybe for other people, you know, processing this trauma is different, but just talking about it, like just verbalizing it, talking about it, talking to you about it today, that has been pivotal for me. Because I mean, just in the first written exposure therapy, I was just sobbing. Like I was writing about these things, sobbing, and now I can talk about them and I still get emotional and I still feel a little tightness in my chest. These two traumas have nowhere near the same hold, the same control, the same power over me as they did before I started doing this processing work. So thank you for being here for this processing work. I think this has been really great for my mom and I to talk about this, because I am super hyper protective over my mom, and it developed literally my biggest fear, which is losing my mom, because from these incidents, that just is what developed. And so talking to my mom about it now, like growing up, she thought I was just like super controlling, being like, that's not safe, don't do that, where I would just like almost have a panic attack if she did something that I thought was unsafe, because in my mind, if anything happened, I was gonna have to save her again. And so it's been incredibly helpful to talk to my mom about like, I'm not controlling, I just have severe like PTSD. And so when it comes to me trying to like protect my mom, yeah, I will definitely still have a panic attack if I think she's doing something unsafe. So that's something that we are still processing and like still working through, but definitely like super duper overprotective of my mom now since I was 10.5 years old. So these are all things that I'm like continuously working on, processing, journaling about, continuing to talk about. And so thank you for listening to these stories. Thank you for taking care with these stories. These are hugely traumatic things that I've not told even some of my closest friends. I'm talking about it like as much as I can now, because I've found such an unburdening from just doing that. And I'm gonna do a Substack, I think, on these stories as well to try to process them as I go. But yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for processing with me. And maybe this will encourage you to look at some of your own traumas and encourage you to try to process them and try to integrate those experiences, because this was like incredibly helpful for me. And I'm going to be continuing to do this with other traumas too, for sure. So thanks for being here, my friends, and for holding little Sierra's heart in your hands as you listen to these stories. You never know what other people are going through, so please be kind. As my hoodie says, can you see that? It says kindness always wins. And so a little reminder today, because you have no idea the traumas, the triggers, PTSD that people might have and might be actively going through. Or it might be like the worst day of someone's life, and that's the day you encounter them on. So all things to keep in mind. Thanks for listening, my friends. I will talk to you in the next video, and I hope you are having an amazing day.